Hello Zero Books readers. This video is the second in a series of videos that aim to wrestle with some of the ideas that were brought up in our video on BoJack Horseman and postmodernism. Specifically, we'll tackle problems with Enlightenment-style reason and Descartes' subject-object binary by considering Heidegger's critique of metaphysics while quoting from Liam Mitchell's book, Ludopolitics. But in the end, this video will mostly be an excuse for me to talk about Fortnite and Adult Swim's Duck Game. In the last video, I suggested that Max Stirner's egoism was a kind of nihilism. In this video, we'll consider the ideas of Martin Heidegger, a philosopher that is, in many ways, Stirner's opposite, in order to see whether or not a kind of nihilism, and ironically, an abdication of responsibility, might be underlying his ideas as well. But before we do that, I want to complain about being middle-aged for a minute, or to put it in the language of Heidegger, to whine about my own finitude. A few weeks back, I visited the Red Fox Vintage store here in Portland, and after I'd made my way past the polyester slacks from the 70s, after I'd moved past the plastic Bob's Big Boy figurine, the bicentennial commemorative coins, the reel-to-reel tape recorder, I found myself shuffling through old magazines in the back room. There were a variety of periodicals that I still think of as being contemporary, but that are, in fact, vintage publications. I think there was a copy of Mondo 2000, maybe a few issues of Plasm. But what really made me depressed was a copy of Adbusters that I found there. It made me so depressed to find this copy of Adbusters from 2007 in a vintage store that I went ahead and bought it. If you're part of the 69% of this channel's audience that is between the ages of 24 and 44, then you might have heard about Adbusters. They're the people who put out the call to action that started the Occupy movement way back in 2011. You remember 2011? That was the year before the self-transforming machine elves completely rearranged the foundation of reality. 2007 is probably the last year that I could read Adbusters and still take it seriously, as their anti-consumerist line was no longer really tenable after the economic crisis of 2008. So when I got the magazine home, I found myself reading it with a more critical eye than I would have read it, say, a decade or 15 years ago. What jumped out at me was that they'd published a speech from Heidegger. And let me read to you from the introduction for that speech that was published in Adbusters. In 1955, influential German philosopher Martin Heidegger delivered a commemorative address in honor of the composer Conradin Kreutzer, who died in 1849. Heidegger took advantage of the speech to discuss, in a manner much more accessible than in his regular writings, the differences between what he terms calculative and meditative thought. Here he argues that modern science, and indeed modern existence in general, is characterized by the unprecedented rise of calculative thought, which approaches the world as an object to be manipulated and exploited, and is the source of human technology. What Heidegger argued in his speech was that what was needed, not only in order to properly commemorate the life of the Romantic composer Conradin Kreutzer, but also if we wish to live authentically, was to develop a capacity to think meditatively rather than in a calculating way. Heidegger spoke of how technological wonders were undermining our ability to achieve this meditative thinking. He insisted that these new technologies were, quote, determining the relation of man to that which exists in ways that are destructive. He said, quote, the Nobel Prize winners of 1955 proclaimed that science is a road to a happier life. What is the sense of this statement? Does it spring from reflection? Does it even ponder on the meaning of the atomic age?
It's just the age. The atomic age!
In the last video on Stirner, I pointed out that the nihilism or sense of meaninglessness that arose after the invention of the atom bomb was a background theme in Nicholas Ray's Rebel Without a Cause. Heidegger felt this same hollow meaninglessness that troubled James Dean when he spoke at the Conradin Kreutzer Memorial Concert. He argued, Heidegger did, that we'd allowed ourselves to be seduced by the possibility of floating free above nature rather than acknowledging our rootedness in the world. We imagined ourselves as brains in jars rather than admit that we were rooted to the world not as material objects, but as beings who, like it or not, were there. The remedy for our modern woes, according to Heidegger, was to accept our finitude, put ourselves into the service of a project that was bigger than we were, and to seek to master some small part of the world as we found it. We would have to be willing to sacrifice ourselves and to put ourselves at risk as we strove to create something authentic and true. We weren't and we are not outside the world as it is, but we are already in the world and must accept the frame the world has given us, the meaning the world has always already provided.
And you can this is not a bad interpretation of human beings in the world. You can look at what people construct, what they build, what they make, what they cherish. And this is supposed to be, and I think it's not an unreasonable interpretation of human being. In terms of the past, care reveals something that you all already know. By the time that you showed up here today, you were already a being in the world. It's an interesting structural feature of all of you. You were, barring the possibility, which we will reach by the time these lectures are over, that at least some of you are replicants, cyborgs. That's possible. I mean, it's even, I think, technically possible. But in any case, barring that last little note of suspicion, the human structure as uncovered by Heidegger is care, and in terms of the past, it shows that we are beings already in the world, which means that the philosophical project of starting without prejudices, starting without biases, starting without interpretations, would be as stupid as to have someone start speaking Shakespeare without having a language. In a way, the deep and powerful blow that Heidegger lays against philosophy is as a discipline that can start from scratch and tell us who we are, that can just start with a clean slate and build it up. No, the way we experience our lives is we wake up and, hell, we're already here.
Heidegger ultimately felt that what was important was not the working out of abstract truths from a position we imagined might be outside of the world, but rather the project of making a home in the world.
It is not about creating an intellectual space. It is not. Do you understand that? It's about creating a home here.
You might remember that in the video on BoJack Horseman, I made an attempt to defend Descartes, and at this point, it might start to be clear as to why I did that. The difficulty with Heidegger's rejection of Descartes' dualism, his insistence that the line between ourselves and the world outside of ourselves should be erased, leaves us in danger of prioritizing what seems to be, over and above, truth of either what is, or more to the point, of what could be. Let's return to this question of technology in that speech from Heidegger to illustrate the point in concrete terms. Heidegger wanted to reject the frame that technology was putting around the world, but not technology itself. He said that the trick was to use technological devices as they were meant to be used, but also to let them alone when necessary. We needed to turn off our technology every once in a while, to walk away from it, so that we might be grounded, rooted, authentic, and real. But what are we to do in a world with something like Fortnite?
Is this what you wanted?
According to USA Today, the video game Fortnite is as addictive as heroin. One mother describing her teenage boy is quoted saying, "We'd made some progress in getting him to cut down his Fortnite hours and get better sleep, but he's slipped back into his old habits. I've never seen a game that has such control over kids' minds." If Heidegger is right, not only are these addictive games keeping us from getting enough sleep, they are fundamentally altering our relationship with the world, and therefore changing our very being. The Zero Books author Liam Mitchell agrees with Heidegger. The difficulty with contemporary video games like Fortnite is not just that they are addictive, but worse, that when the gamer develops a compulsion to play, it plunges him into nihilism. Mitchell writes, quote, "When our interest in video games becomes a compulsion, not an addiction, but a preference for treating the world in these terms, we hear an echo of the same loss of comprehension, disappearance of purpose, and trembling of ground that characterizes late modernity." There's something to this Heideggerian critique of video games. I've experienced this nihilism myself, not while playing Fortnite, but while playing the even more compulsively addictive travesty called Duck Game. How can I describe my relationship to this game? Maybe I should start by telling you that I play this game with my son, and that I always lose. When you play Duck Game, you accumulate fans, or at least you sometimes do. My son has 14,679 fans, and all of them have 100% loyalty. The last time we played, I ended up with 2 fans in the end, and they had a loyalty level of 15%. Duck Game is a release from Adult Swim, wherein innocent ducks are made to run around on a side stroller, grabbing weapons, mostly guns, until only one duck is still standing. It makes a game out of poultry and murder is poultry. And I can say for certain that at least while I've played the game, I found it changed my outlook, my very relationship to the world into which I've been thrown.
You gotta read me a book, fool! Yeah!
Having found myself with this murderous impulse, found myself captured by the urge to kill my son's duck with that stupid frog hat, I can tell you that this idea of playing the Duck Game in moderation, this notion that I should play it when it is necessary to play and leave it behind when I need time to meditate so as to maintain my authenticity, is absurd. The game is a trap. It can't be done in moderation. It can't be left alone.
But with this kind of experience, how can you prove that, as it were, it's not going on in their head, it's their experience?
The third thing we did wasn't as popular. We closed the Oasis on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I know it sounds like a weird move, but people need to spend more time in the real world. Because, like Halliday said, reality is the only thing that's real.
The only way to escape from the Duck Game isn't to turn it off 3 days a week, so I might sit in quiet contemplation and make out with my wife or something. And it isn't to turn it off altogether, because some other lure from the computer screen will surely come along to entice me. The only escape from these games isn't to try to moderate them, but to plunge through, to go all the way to the end.
Die Frage nach der Forderung der Weltveränderung führt ja auf einen viel zitierten Satz von Karl Marx, die Thesen über Feuerbach, zurück. Und ich will ihn, um ihn genau zu zitieren, auch gleich vorlesen. Die Philosophen haben die Welt nur verschieden interpretiert, unterstrichen. Es kommt darauf an, sie zu verändern. Bei der Zitation dieses Satzes und bei der Befolgung dieses Satzes übersieht man, dass eine Weltveränderung voraussetzt eine Änderung der Weltvorstellung. Und dass eine Weltvorstellung nur zu gewinnen ist dadurch, dass man die Welt zureichend interpretiert. Das heißt, Marx fußt auf einer ganz bestimmten Weltinterpretation, um seine Veränderung zu fordern. Und dadurch erweist sich dieser Satz als nicht fundierter Satz. Er weckt den Eindruck, als sei entschieden gegen die Philosophie gesprochen, während im zweiten Teil des Satzes gerade unausgesprochen die Forderung einer Philosophie vorausgesetzt.
Going all the way to the end, imagining that this everyday bourgeois reality that I was thrown into when I was born could be replaced by video games was something that I tried to do in Bash Revolution. Writing that required that I oppose the notion that a new world could be opened up by developing skill and possibility within this one. Rather, I had to consider how it might be possible that the mechanism that dictated the terms of this world could be understood and then altered or replaced. The goal wasn't to merely modify the world as it is, but to think through how the world as it is works, and then, with that knowledge, to act to change it. In Bash Revolution, I set up characters who would work on how to stop producing this world based on economic categories and the state. I'll read you an excerpt. As I mentioned a few days ago, back in the 60s, there were these French artists who wanted to change society. Kufo was reading about them. She was into that kind of thing. And when she came across a section in her anthology about one particular artist, a guy named Constant, she figured she'd found a solution for Bucky's problem. She read that the modern city is a thinly disguised mechanism for extracting productivity out of its inhabitants. A huge machine that exploits the very lives it is meant to foster. Nature has already been replaced. Technology has long been the new nature that must now be creatively transformed to support a new culture. Kufo read that from her book. What we needed to do, apparently, was to go ahead and build a new architecture, a new mechanism for the world. What Kufo and Yuma wanted to do was to realize these 60s dreams by making reality into art, or art into reality.
Do you think capitalism is a fundamentally unstable system?
Absolutely.
And if so, okay, great. And if so, what comes after it? How do we get there?
Well, what comes after it certainly is going to be determined by technological change. That's Marx.
Thanks for watching this Zero Books video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to this channel and click on the notifications bell so that you'll be alerted whenever we release a new video. You should also consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons get access to our Inside Zero Books podcast every week and can get access to the Zero Books Book Club and help us to continue making online content from the left.